My name is Charlotte, and I'm 32 years old. 8 years ago, I thought I knew what betrayal felt like. I was wrong. Real betrayal isn't just having your heart broken, it's watching your entire family choose the person who broke it. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from, and if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. But sometimes, life has a way of evening the score in ways you never saw coming. It was a rainy Thursday morning in Portland when my phone rang. I was in my home office, reviewing architectural plans for a community center renovation, when an unknown number flashed across my screen. Something told me to answer. "Charlotte, it's Victoria." The sound of my sister's voice after 8 years of silence hit me like ice water. Victoria, always perfectly composed, always in control. Even now, delivering what I knew would be terrible news, her voice carried that same calculated sweetness that had fooled everyone for so long. "Mom passed away last night," she continued, not waiting for my response. "I thought you should know, even though you've been absent from the family." Absent. As if I had chosen to disappear. As if they hadn't made it clear that my presence was no longer welcome after what happened with Marcus. "When is the service?" I asked, keeping my voice steady. "Saturday, 2 o'clock at St. Matthew's. I'm sure you remember where that is. Assuming you still live in that same little neighborhood." There it was, the subtle dig. Victoria couldn't help herself. Even in a moment of grief, she had to remind me of my place in her carefully constructed. "I'll be there," I said simply. "Good. I think it's what Mom would have wanted." The line went dead, leaving me staring at my phone in the sudden quiet of my office. Outside, the rain continued its steady rhythm against the windows, but inside, everything felt suspended in time. I hadn't thought about Marcus, my former fiancé, in months. Not consciously, anyway. But Victoria's call brought it all rushing back. The way he'd looked at me that last morning, guilty and conflicted. The way he'd stammered through his explanation about unexpected feelings in complicated situations. The way my parents had nodded sympathetically when Victoria, tears streaming down her perfect cheeks, had confessed that she and Marcus had fallen in love and couldn't help themselves. Marcus Beaumont, heir to a real estate empire, charming in that effortless way that comes with generational wealth, and completely captivated by my sister's calculated vulnerability. He'd been mine, or so I'd thought. We'd been planning our wedding, looking at houses, talking about the future. I'd believed we were building something real. Victoria had other plans. Growing up, Victoria was the golden child, 3 years younger than me, but somehow always ahead in everything that mattered to our parents. She was the one who got piano lessons, modeling auditions, and college tuition without question. I was the responsible one, the one who worked part-time through high school, who earned scholarships, who never asked for anything because I knew the answer would always be, "We'll see what we can do for Victoria first." When I met Marcus at a charity gala downtown, I thought I'd finally found something that was mine. He was brilliant, successful, and genuinely interested in my work as an architect. He'd ask about my projects, encourage my ideas, and make me feel like my dreams matter. For 2 years we built a life together. He supported my decision to start my own firm, celebrating every small victory along the way. Then Victoria came home from her failed attempt at becoming an influencer in Los Angeles. It started innocently enough. Family dinners where she'd arrive looking defeated, talking about how hard it was to make it in the entertainment industry. Marcus, being naturally compassionate, would offer encouragement. Victoria would smile gratefully, her eyes just a little too bright, her hand lingering just a moment too long when she thanked him. I should have seen it coming. Victoria had always been drawn to what I had. My friends, my achievements, my happiness. But I'd never thought she'd go after the person I loved. The signs were subtle at first. Marcus would mention running into Victoria at the coffee shop near his office. She'd text him occasionally asking for advice about her career. He'd show me the messages, completely transparent, which made me feel foolish for the unease growing in my stomach. Then came the evening that changed everything. I was working late on a project proposal when Marcus came home, his usual confident demeanor replaced by something I'd never seen before. guilt, mixed with confusion. He sat down across from me at the kitchen table, running his hands through his hair. "We need to talk," he said. Those 4 words shattered my world before he'd even explained what had happened. Victoria had shown up at his office that afternoon, crying about a family emergency that didn't exist. She'd confessed her feelings for him, told him she'd been in love with him since the day we met. She'd painted herself as the tortured sister suffering in silence while watching him with me. "I don't understand what's happening," Marcus said, his voice barely above a whisper. I thought I knew what I wanted. But seeing her so broken, so vulnerable— "Charlotte, I think I might have feelings for her too." The engagement ring on my finger suddenly felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. I stared at this man I'd planned to spend my life with, watching him unravel before my eyes. "You're confused," I said, grasping for anything that might make sense of this nightmare. "Victoria has always been dramatic. She's manipulating you." But even as I said it, I could see in his eyes that it was too late. Victoria had already won. Within a month, Marcus had moved out of our apartment. Within 2 months, he and Victoria were publicly together. Within 6 months, they were engaged, and my family, they welcomed him with open arms, as if he'd always been meant to be Victoria's Prince Charming. My parents' reaction was the cruelest cut of all. When I tried to explain what had really happened, how Victoria had deliberately pursued Marcus, they looked at me with disappointment. "Charlotte, honey," my mother had said, her voice dripping with condescension, "you can't blame your sister for following her heart. Sometimes these things just happen." My father had been more direct. "Maybe this is for the best. Victoria and Marcus seem very happy together." That was the moment I realized I wasn't just losing my fiancé, I was losing my entire family. They'd chosen sides, and I wasn't on the winning team. So I did what I had to do. I left. I moved across town, threw myself into my work, and slowly rebuilt my life from the ground up. I learned to be alone, to find strength in solitude, to define success on my own terms. My architectural firm grew steadily, earning recognition for innovative community projects that actually made a difference in people's lives. And then, 2 years after the disaster with Marcus, I met Dave. David wasn't like Marcus, where Marcus was flashy and charming. David was steady and genuine. He was a pediatric surgeon at the Children's Hospital, someone who saved lives every day without needing recognition or praise. We met at a fundraiser for the hospital's new wing, a building I'd designed. "You created something beautiful," he'd said, standing next to me as we looked at the architectural model. "It's going to help a lot of kids." I'd fallen for his quiet confidence, his genuine compassion, his complete lack of pretense. David didn't need to prove anything to anyone. He simply was who he was. And somehow that was enough for me to believe in love again. We'd been married for 4 years now, and every day I marveled at how different real love felt from what I'd had with Marcus. David supported my dreams without trying to control them. He celebrated my successes without making them about himself. He was my partner in the truest sense of the word. But none of this had mattered to my family. They'd sent a wedding invitation to Victoria and Marcus, but not to me. They'd shared photos of Victoria's elaborate wedding on social media, while ignoring my quiet courthouse ceremony. They'd made their choice clear. Victoria was their daughter, and I was just someone who used to live in their house. Now, sitting in my office with the rain still falling, I realized I'd have to face all of them again. Victoria with her perfect life and stolen happiness. Marcus with his guilty conscience and weak character. My parents with their selective blindness and conditional love. I took a deep breath and walked to the kitchen, where David was preparing his lunch for the hospital. "Everything okay?" he asked, immediately reading my expression. "My mom died," I said simply. "I have to go to the funeral." David set down his sandwich and came to me immediately, pulling me into his arms. He didn't ask questions or offer empty platitudes. He just held me, letting me process the complicated grief of losing someone who'd never truly seen me. "Do you want me to come with you?" he asked. I looked up at him, this man who'd given me back my faith and love, who'd shown me what it meant to be truly cherished. "Actually, yes, I think I do." He smiled and kissed my forehead. "Then I'll be there." As I prepared for the funeral, I had no idea that this weekend would change everything. I thought I was simply going to say goodbye to my mother and endure a few uncomfortable hours with my estranged family. A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, We'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. I had no idea that Victoria was about to discover just how much my life had changed since she'd stolen what she thought was my only chance at happiness. Some surprises I was about to learn are worth waiting 8 years for. Saturday arrived with crisp autumn air and golden sunlight filtering through the maple trees. David and I drove to St. Matthew's in comfortable silence, his hand resting gently on mine as we navigated the familiar streets of my childhood neighborhood. The church looked smaller than I remembered, its white steeple reaching toward the cloudless sky. Cars filled the parking lot, expensive sedans and SUVs that screamed success and status. I recognized some of them from my parents' social circle, people who had watched my humiliation 8 years ago with barely concealed fascination. "Are you ready for this?" David asked, as we parked. I squeezed his hand. "With you here?" "I think I actually am." We walked toward the church entrance, my heels clicking against the pavement. I'd chosen my outfit carefully, an elegant black dress that spoke of quiet confidence rather than desperate attempts to impress. David looked distinguished in his charcoal suit, every inch the successful professional he was. As we approached the steps, I saw them. Victoria stood near the church doors, holding court with a small group of relatives. She wore a designer black dress that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent, her platinum blonde hair styled in perfect waves. Even in grief, she looked like she'd stepped off a magazine cover. Beside her stood Marcus. 8 years had changed him. The boyish charm had hardened into something more calculated. His hairline had receded slightly, and there was a softness around his middle that spoke of too many business lunches and not enough exercise. He still carried himself with that entitled confidence, but something in his posture seemed forced now, like he was trying too hard to convince everyone, including himself, that he belonged in his expensive suit. Victoria saw me first. Her perfectly applied makeup couldn't hide the flash of shock that crossed her face before she quickly composed herself into a practiced smile. "Charlotte," she said, her voice carrying across the church steps, "you came." The small group around her turned to look at me, and I felt the familiar weight of their judgment. These were the same people who had whispered about my embarrassing behavior when I'd tried to fight for my relationship with Marcus. They'd painted me as the bitter, jealous sister who couldn't accept that true love had found its way to the right person. "Of course I came," I replied evenly. "She was my mother, too." Victoria's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "And you brought someone," she said, her eyes moving to David with obvious curiosity. This was the moment I'd been both dreading and anticipating. I slipped my arm through David's and felt his quiet strength anchor me. "Victoria, Marcus, I'd like you to meet my husband, Dr. David Morrison." The silence that followed was deafening. Victoria's perfectly composed mask slipped for just a moment, revealing something raw and confused underneath. Marcus's face went completely pale, his confident smile faltering as he stared at David. Because David Morrison wasn't just any surgeon. He was Dr. David Morrison, chief of pediatric surgery at Portland Children's Hospital, member of the hospital board, and heir to the Morrison medical dynasty, a family whose wealth made Marcus's real estate fortune look modest by comparison. More importantly, David was the man whose family foundation had just donated $50 million to build the new Children's Medical Research Center that had been all over the news for months. His face had been on magazine covers. His innovations in pediatric surgery had earned him international recognition, and his quiet philanthropy had made him one of the most respected figures in the city. Victoria's mouth opened slightly, then closed. For the first time in my life, I watched my sister struggle to find words. Marcus extended his hand to David, his voice coming out slightly hoarse. "Dr. Morrison, we've heard wonderful things about your work at the hospital." David shook his hand with professional courtesy, his grip firm but not aggressive. "Thank you. Charlotte tells me you're in real estate." The simple statement, delivered without malice or judgment, somehow highlighted the vast difference between David's life-saving work and Marcus's property development, in a way that made Marcus visibly uncomfortable. "Yes, well, we should probably head inside." Victoria finally managed, her usual command of social situations completely shattered. As we walked into the church, I caught snippets of whispered conversations around us. Word was spreading quickly through the crowd about who David was, and I could feel the shift in attention. Suddenly, I wasn't the pathetic sister who'd been left behind. I was the woman who'd married one of the most eligible and respected men in the state. We found seats in the third row. I noticed Victoria and Marcus taking their places in the front row, but Victoria kept glancing back at us, her composure clearly shaken. The service began with traditional hymns and readings. Pastor Williams, who'd known our family for decades, spoke about my mother's dedication to community service and her love for her daughters. It was a kind eulogy focusing on her better qualities, while diplomatically avoiding the more complicated aspects of her personality. When it came time for family members to speak, Victoria rose first. She walked to the podium with her usual grace, but I could see the tension in her shoulders. My mother, Helen, was a woman who believed in following your heart. Victoria began, her voice steady but lacking its usual conviction. She taught me that sometimes life takes unexpected turns and we have to be brave enough to embrace change. She continued speaking about family bonds and second chances, but her words felt hollow, rehearsed. I noticed her eyes kept drifting to David, as if she couldn't quite process his presence. When Victoria finished, she looked directly at me, clearly expecting me to remain seated. In the past, I would have stayed quiet, invisible, letting Victoria have the spotlight as always. Instead, I stood up. "I'd like to say something as well," I announced, walking toward the podium. I saw Victoria's face flash with panic as she returned to her seat. She hadn't expected this, me claiming space, demanding to be heard. At the podium, I looked out at the assembled crowd. Many of these people had watched my humiliation 8 years ago with a mixture of pity and schadenfreude. Now they were seeing something different. "My mother was complicated," I began, my voice clear and strong. "She had strong opinions about how life should be lived, about what success looked like, about which choices were worthy of her approval." I paused, letting my words settle over the congregation. What I learned from her, sometimes the hard way, is that real strength comes from building your own definition of success. Not from taking what belongs to someone else, but from creating something meaningful with your own hands, your own heart, your own choices. I glanced at Victoria, whose face had gone very pale. "Mom taught me that family isn't just about blood, it's about the people who show up for you when life gets difficult. The people who celebrate your victories without diminishing them. The people who love you not for what you can give them, but for who you are." My eyes found David in the crowd, and he smiled at me with such warmth and pride that I felt my courage strengthen. She also taught me, perhaps without meaning to, that sometimes the greatest gift life can give you is showing you exactly who people really are. Because once you see clearly, you can finally start building something real. I returned to my seat beside David, who squeezed my hand gently. The congregation was quiet, processing words that were clearly about more than just my mother's memory. After the service, we gathered at the reception hall for the traditional meal and fellowship. The room buzzed with conversation, but I noticed how different the energy felt from 8 years ago. Then, I'd been the object of pity and whispered gossip. Now, people approached David and me with genuine respect and curiosity. Mrs. Patterson, who'd been my mother's bridge partner, came over with obvious excitement. "Charlotte, dear, I had no idea you'd married Dr. Morrison. We just saw him on the news last month about that groundbreaking surgery he performed. You must be so proud." Before I could respond, she continued, "And that new children's center his family is funding, it's going to change so many lives. How wonderful that you're part of such important work." I smiled graciously, accepting congratulations and fielding questions about David's medical innovations and our life together. It was surreal, being the center of positive attention in a room where I'd once been persona non grata. Across the room, I watched Victoria and Marcus. They stood together, but there was a distance between them that hadn't been there before. Marcus kept glancing in our direction, his expression unreadable. Victoria maintained her social smile, but I could see the strain around her eyes. Finally, Victoria excused herself from her conversation and approached us. Her usual confidence seemed forced, brittle. "Charlotte," she said, her voice carefully controlled, "could I speak with you privately?" David looked at me questioningly, and I nodded. "I'll be right back." Victoria led me to a quiet corner of the reception hall, away from the crowd. For a moment we stood in silence, two sisters who'd once shared everything and now shared nothing but DNA and complicated history. "You never mentioned you were married to David Morrison," Victoria said finally. "You never asked about my life," I replied simply. "For 8 years you made it clear you weren't interested in who I'd become." Victoria's mask slipped again, revealing something desperate underneath. "Do you have any idea who he is? What is his family worth?" "I know exactly who he is," I said quietly. "The question is, do you know who you married?" Something flickered in Victoria's eyes. Doubt, maybe. Or the first crack in whatever illusion she'd been living. "Marcus and I are happy," she said, but her voice lacked conviction. "Are you?" I asked. "Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you spent 8 years building a life with someone else's dream, only to discover that real happiness can't be stolen." Victoria stared at me, and for the first time in our lives, I saw her truly speechless. The sister who always had the perfect comeback, the flawless response, stood before me with nothing to say. I turned to rejoin David, leaving Victoria standing alone in the corner, finally facing the truth she'd been running from for 8 years. The real reckoning was just beginning. The drive back to our hotel was quiet, but it wasn't the comfortable silence David and I usually shared. I could feel questions hanging in the air between us, and I knew this day had stirred up more than just old family drama. "You want to talk about it?" David asked as we pulled into the hotel parking garage. I looked at him, this man who'd just witnessed the messy reality of my past without flinching, who'd stood beside me with quiet dignity while my family tried to process their shock. "I should have prepared you better," I said. "Warned you about what you were walking into." David turned off the engine and faced me fully. "Charlotte, I knew exactly what I was walking into. You think I didn't research your family after you told me about them?" That surprised me. "You did?" "Of course I did. When someone you love has been hurt that badly, you want to understand the full picture." He reached for my hand. "I knew about Marcus's business dealings, about Victoria's social media presence, about your parents' involvement in their relationship. I've known for years." I stared at him. "And you never said anything?" "It wasn't my story to tell, or my pain to heal. That was yours to work through." He smiled gently, but I have to admit, seeing Victoria's face when she realized who I was, that was pretty satisfying. We went up to our room, and I finally allowed myself to decompress from the emotional weight of the day. But even as I changed out of my funeral clothes, I couldn't shake the feeling that something significant had shifted. Victoria's mask had cracked, and I suspected the reverberations would extend far beyond today. My phone buzzed with a text message. "Unknown number. We need to talk. Meet me at Harbor Coffee tomorrow at 10 a.m. Marcus." After 8 years of silence, he wanted to talk. I showed the message to David, who read it with a frown. "You don't have to go," he said. "You don't owe him anything." "No, I don't," I agreed. "But I'm curious what he has to say after all this time." David studied my face. "Are you sure you're ready for whatever this is?" I thought about the woman I'd been 8 years ago, devastated, angry, convinced that losing Marcus meant losing my chance at happiness. Then I thought about who I'd become, successful, loved, genuinely content with the life I'd built. "Yeah," I said. "I think I am." The next morning, I walked into Harbor Coffee feeling more composed than I had any right to be. Marcus was already there, sitting at a corner table with 2 cups of coffee. He looked older in the morning light, tired in a way that expensive suits couldn't hide. "You came," he said, as I sat down across from him. "I'm curious," I replied simply. He pushed one of the coffee cups toward me. Black. the way I used to drink it. The fact that he remembered was both touching and unsettling. I've been thinking about what to say to you for years, Marcus began, his voice quieter than I remembered. Rehearsing conversations in my head, imagining what I'd do if I ever saw you again. And none of those rehearsals prepared me for yesterday. He ran his hand through his hair, a gesture I recognized from our time together. Dr. David Morrison. Jesus. Charlotte, do you have any idea what that means? I sipped my coffee, studying his face. What do you think it means, Marcus? It means you didn't just move on, you upgraded. There was bitterness in his voice, but also something else. Regret, maybe. The Morrison Family Foundation, the medical research, the hospital board seats. We're talking about generational wealth that makes my family's money look like pocket change. Is that really what you think this is about? I asked. Money? Marcus leaned back in his chair, his expression conflicted. Isn't it? Victoria's been obsessed with status and wealth since we got married. She tracks every society page, every charity gala, every business acquisition. When she saw your husband yesterday, he trailed off, but I could fill in the blanks. She realized she picked the wrong target. I finished. Marcus winced. That's a harsh way to put it, but accurate. He was quiet for a long moment, staring into his coffee cup. When he looked up again, there was something raw and honest in his expression that I hadn't seen since before Victoria entered our lives. I made a mistake, Charlotte. A huge, life-altering mistake. Just one? I asked, raising an eyebrow. Okay, multiple mistakes. But the biggest one was believing Victoria when she said you didn't really love me, that you were just comfortable with the security I provided. The words hit me like a physical blow. She said what? She told me you'd admitted to her that you were only with me because of my money. That you were relieved to have found someone who could take care of you financially because you were worried about making it on your own. Marcus's voice was barely above a whisper. She said you'd never been physically attracted to me, that you were just good at pretending. I felt the blood drain from my face. Even 8 years later, Victoria's manipulation had the power to shock me. And you believed her? She seemed so broken about it, so guilty for telling me. She said she couldn't bear to watch me marry someone who didn't truly love me. Marcus looked at me with eyes full of regret. She was very convincing. She always was. I took a shaky breath. Marcus, none of that was true. Not a single word. I know that now. I think I knew it then, deep down. But I was weak. Victoria made me feel like some kind of hero for rescuing her from her unrequited love, and like an even bigger hero for escaping a loveless marriage. I stared at him, processing this revelation. Victoria hadn't just stolen my fiancé, she'd poisoned his perception of our entire relationship to do it. How long did it take you to figure out the truth? I asked. Marcus laughed bitterly. About 6 months into our marriage, Victoria's version of love turned out to be very transactional. Everything was about appearances, about what I could provide for her image. The woman who'd claimed to be heartbroken over my relationship with you suddenly seemed very focused on the business advantages of our union. But you stayed married. For a while. Fried. I guess. And hope that maybe it will get better. He met my eyes. It didn't. We divorced 2 years ago. That was news to me. Divorced? Quietly. Victoria insisted on a confidentiality agreement. Bad for both of our public images. Apparently, she still wears her rings in public and still uses my name for business purposes. To the outside world, we're still the perfect couple. I felt a strange mix of satisfaction and pity. So what's the real story? The real story is that I spent 6 years married to someone who saw me as a stepping stone, not a partner, someone who was constantly looking for the next opportunity, the next level up. Marcus's voice was heavy with exhaustion. She never loved me, Charlotte. I'm not even sure she's capable of loving anyone but herself. I thought about Victoria's shock yesterday, the way she'd stared at David with undisguised calculation. "Is that why you wanted to see me? To clear your conscience?" "Partly," Marcus admitted. "But also to warn you." "Warn me about what?" Marcus leaned forward, his expression serious. "Victoria's been researching your husband since yesterday. She spent all night on her laptop, pulling up articles about his family, his net worth, his foundation work. She's making calls to mutual acquaintances, trying to get information about your marriage." "What kind of information?" "Whether it's real. Whether you're happy. Whether there might be opportunities for her to insert herself into your life again." A chill ran down my spine. "You're saying she's planning something?" "I'm saying Victoria has never met a successful man she didn't think she could win over if she set her mind to it. And your husband represents everything she's been chasing her whole life: real wealth, real status, real respect." I set down my coffee cup, my hand trembling slightly. "She wouldn't dare." "Wouldn't she?" Marcus asked quietly. "She destroyed your relationship with me based on lies and manipulation. What makes you think she wouldn't try it again, especially now that the stakes are so much higher?" I thought about David. Kind, trusting David, who'd grown up in a world where people generally were who they claimed to be. He wouldn't be expecting Victoria's particular brand of calculated deception. "There's something else," Marcus continued. "Victoria's been having financial problems. Her social media career never really took off the way she planned, and the divorce settlement wasn't as generous as she'd hoped. She's been living on credit and borrowed time for months. So she's desperate. And desperate people do desperate things." Marcus reached across the table and touched my hand briefly. "I know I have no right to ask this after what I did to you, but please be careful. Don't let her destroy what you've built with David the way she destroyed what we had." I pulled my hand back, not out of anger but out of clarity. Whatever Marcus and I had shared was ancient history, but the threat he was describing was immediate and real. "Thank you for the warning," I said, standing up. "I'll handle Victoria." "Charlotte," Marcus called as I turned to leave. "For what it's worth, I really am sorry. You deserved so much better than what I gave you." I looked back at him. This man who'd once been my whole world, now looking small and defeated in the corner of a coffee shop. "You're right. I did deserve better. And eventually, I found it." As I walked back to the hotel, my mind was already racing. Victoria was planning something, and I had no intention of letting her succeed. But this time, I wouldn't be the naive, trusting woman she'd manipulated before. This time, I was ready for war. I found David in our hotel room, reviewing patient files on his laptop. He looked up as I entered, immediately reading the tension in my posture. "How did it go with Marcus?" he asked, closing the laptop and giving me his full attention. I sat down beside him on the bed and relayed everything Marcus had told me: Victoria's lies about my feelings, their secret divorce, her financial desperation, and most importantly, her current research into David's background and wealth. David listened without interruption, his expression growing more serious with each revelation. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment. "So she's planning to make a move on me," he said finally. "According to Marcus, yes, and knowing Victoria, she'll be strategic about it. She won't just show up and throw herself at you. She'll find a way to insert herself into our lives gradually, build trust, and create opportunities." David stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the city skyline. "You know, I've dealt with people trying to get close to me for my family's money before. It comes with the territory. But this is different." "Different how?" He turned back to me. "Because this isn't some stranger trying to social climb. This is someone who's already proven she'll destroy your happiness to get what she wants. Someone who has intimate knowledge of how to hurt you." The protection in his voice made my chest tighten with gratitude. David wasn't just concerned about Victoria targeting him. He was furious about what she'd already done to me. "What do you want to do?" he asked. I'd been thinking about this since leaving the coffee shop. Victoria expected me to react the way I had 8 years ago, with shock, hurt, and eventual retreat. She was counting on me being the same woman who'd quietly disappeared rather than fight for what was mine. She was wrong. I want to beat her at her own game, I said, but I need your help. David's eyes lit up with interest. What did you have in mind? Victoria operates on information and opportunity. She researches her targets, finds their weaknesses, then positions herself as the solution to their problems. But what if we controlled the information she was getting? What if we fed her exactly what we wanted her to know? A trap, David said, understanding immediately. Exactly. But it has to be believable. We need to give her an opening that looks perfect but is actually designed to expose her. We spent the next hour planning. David was surprisingly good at strategy. Apparently, navigating hospital politics and medical research funding had taught him a thing or two about managing manipulative people. Our plan was elegant in its simplicity. We would return to Portland and make sure certain information about our marriage reached Victoria through mutual acquaintances. Information that would make her believe she'd found the perfect opportunity to strike. 2 weeks later, we were back home, and our plan was already in motion. David had mentioned to a colleague who moved in the same social circles as Victoria that we were going through a rough patch. Nothing dramatic, just the kind of normal marital stress that all couples experience. Work pressure, scheduling conflicts, the challenge of balancing two demanding careers. The colleague, as we'd anticipated, had passed this information along at a charity gala that Victoria was known to attend. Within days, it had filtered back to us through other channels that Victoria was asking discreet questions about our marriage. Phase 2 involved David mentioning to the hospital's public relations director that he was feeling isolated and could use more social connections in the city. This was technically true. David's demanding schedule meant he had few friends outside of work, but we framed it as a vulnerability rather than a simple fact. The PR director, trying to be helpful, had suggested that David attend more social events and maybe consider finding a social coordinator to help him navigate Portland's charity circuit. This suggestion, we knew, would eventually reach Victoria through the interconnected web of Portland's elite social scene. Then we waited. Victoria made her first move 3 weeks after the funeral. She called David's office directly, bypassing me entirely. "Dr. Morrison, this is Victoria Beaumont. We met at my mother's funeral. I'm Charlotte's sister." David had put the call on speaker so I could listen from his office at the hospital. Victoria's voice was perfectly calibrated, friendly, but not over-eager, sympathetic but not intrusive. "Of course, Victoria. How can I help you? I hope you don't mind me calling directly, but I've been thinking about something since the funeral. I'm involved with the Children's Healthcare Initiative here in Portland, and we're always looking for medical professionals who might be interested in joining our advisory board." It was a smart opening, professional, altruistic, giving her a legitimate reason to contact him while positioning herself as someone who shared his passion for helping children. "That sounds interesting," David replied, playing his part perfectly. "What does the advisory role involve?" "Mostly strategic guidance on our fundraising efforts and community outreach programs. We meet monthly, usually over dinner at various venues around the city. It's a great way to network with other professionals who share your commitment to children's welfare." "I'd be open to learning more," David said. "Perhaps we could meet for coffee to discuss it." "That would be wonderful. I know Charlotte's been so busy with her architectural projects lately. It must be challenging to balance two such demanding careers. I thought this might be a nice opportunity for you to connect with people who understand the pressures of meaningful work." There it was, the subtle probe about our marriage, disguised as sympathy and understanding. Victoria was testing whether David would be receptive to talking about relationship stress with her. "Charlotte does work incredibly hard," David agreed. "Sometimes I feel like we're ships passing in the night." I had to admire his performance. He sounded genuinely wistful, like a man who was beginning to feel disconnected from his wife. "I completely understand," Victoria said, her voice warming with practiced empathy. "That's actually one of the reasons I'm so passionate about the Children's Healthcare Initiative. It's given me a sense of purpose and community during some of my own challenging times." They arranged to meet the following Tuesday at a trendy cafe downtown, neutral territory where Victoria could begin her campaign of gradual seduction disguised as professional collaboration. After David hung up, We looked at each other with a mixture of excitement and apprehension. She took the bait, I said. She did. But Charlotte, are you sure you want to go through with this? Once we start, we'll have to see it through to the end. I thought about the woman I'd been 8 years ago, devastated and convinced that Victoria had taken my only chance at happiness. Then I thought about the woman I'd become. Successful, loved, and finally ready to stand up for myself. I'm sure, but we need to be careful. Victoria is dangerous because she's good at reading people and exploiting their emotions. She'll be looking for any sign that you're genuinely dissatisfied with our marriage. Then I'll have to give her what she's looking for, David said. Small signs of frustration, moments of seeming vulnerability. Just enough to make her think she's succeeding. We spent the next few days preparing for the first meeting. David practiced looking slightly overwhelmed when discussing his work schedule, subtly hinting at loneliness without being obvious about it. I made sure to be genuinely busy with work projects so that our separate schedules would appear to support the narrative of a couple growing apart. The day of the meeting, I positioned myself at a coffee shop across the street from where David and Victoria were meeting. I couldn't hear their conversation, but I could observe their body language through the large windows. Victoria was in full performance mode. She leaned forward when David spoke, nodding with exaggerated understanding. She touched his arm briefly when making a point, then pulled back as if catching herself being too familiar. She laughed at his comments with genuine seeming delight. David played his part perfectly. He looked tired, slightly overwhelmed, grateful for her attention and understanding. To anyone watching, it would appear that a lonely, overworked man was enjoying the company of an attractive, empathetic woman who truly understood his challenges. The meeting lasted an hour and a half longer than necessary for a simple professional discussion. When they finally stood to leave, Victoria handed David what appeared to be informational materials about the Children's Healthcare Initiative, but I suspected it also included her personal contact information. They shook hands, but Victoria held the contact just a moment longer than necessary, her other hand briefly touching his forearm in a gesture of warm connection. As David walked back to his car, I saw Victoria through the cafe window, watching him leave with a small, satisfied smile. Phase 1 was complete. Victoria believed she'd found her opening. Now the real game began. Over the next 6 weeks, Victoria's campaign intensified exactly as we'd predicted. She scheduled 3 more advisory board meetings with David, each one more personal than the last. She began texting him directly about children's healthcare articles she thought he'd find interesting. She invited him to a gallery opening, claiming she needed a medical professional's perspective on an art installation about childhood wellness. David played his role flawlessly. He responded to her texts with just the right mix of professional interest and personal gratitude. He mentioned feeling overwhelmed by his workload, casually referenced our scheduling conflicts, and occasionally seemed to linger in their conversations as if he were reluctant to return to his lonely routine. Meanwhile, I maintained my own performance. I took on additional architectural projects that required evening meetings and weekend site visits. When Victoria called me, which she did twice, ostensibly to check in as sisters, I sounded stressed and distracted, mentioning how difficult it was to balance everything. David's been so understanding, I told her during the second call, injecting just a hint of guilt into my voice. I know he's been feeling neglected lately, but this project could really establish my firm's reputation. Marriage is about supporting each other's dreams, Victoria replied, her voice dripping with false sympathy. I'm sure he understands that sometimes we have to prioritize our careers. What she was really saying was that she'd identified the perfect wedge to drive between us. The trap was set. Now we needed Victoria to spring it in a way that would expose her true nature publicly and permanently. The opportunity came when David mentioned that the hospital was hosting its annual gala, a major fundraising event that would be attended by Portland's medical, business, and social elite. The Morrison Family Foundation was the primary sponsor, which meant David would be one of the evening's featured speakers. Victoria's been very helpful with the Children's Healthcare Initiative, David told me over dinner, speaking loudly enough for our server to overhear. We'd chosen a restaurant known for its gossip-prone staff. I should probably invite her to the gala as a thank you. I played my part perfectly, looking slightly annoyed. Another evening where I'll barely see you because you'll be networking and giving speeches. You're welcome to skip it if you're too busy. David replied with just the right touch of resignation. I know these events aren't really your thing anyway. The conversation was designed to reach Victoria through Portland's efficient social grapevine, and it worked. Within 2 days, she'd texted David expressing how honored she'd be to attend such an important event and support his foundation's work. The night of the gala, I arrived separately from David, as we'd planned. I wore a stunning emerald green dress that commanded attention without being ostentatious. My hair styled in an elegant updo that showcased the diamond earrings David had given me for our anniversary. Victoria arrived shortly after me, and I had to admit she looked spectacular. Her black sequined gown was clearly expensive, her jewelry was perfect, and she moved through the crowd with the confidence of someone who belonged in such elegant surroundings. What she didn't know was that almost everyone important at this event already knew the truth about our plan. 2 weeks earlier, David had discreetly informed the hospital board about Victoria's attempts to manipulate him, framing it as a security concern given his family's wealth and public profile. We'd also told Marcus, who had eagerly agreed to help expose Victoria's deception. Even my parents, surprisingly, had been horrified when we'd explained Victoria's pattern of manipulation and had agreed to support our plan. The evening proceeded exactly as we'd orchestrated. David delivered his speech about the importance of children's health care, receiving enthusiastic applause from the audience. Victoria positioned herself near the front, gazing at him with obvious admiration. During the cocktail reception that followed, Victoria made her move. I watched from across the room as she approached David near the bar, her hand briefly touching his arm as she congratulated him on his speech. To any casual observer, it looked like innocent conversation between colleagues, but I could see the calculated intimacy in her gestures, the way she positioned herself just slightly too close, the manner in which she gazed up at him with practiced vulnerability. "Dr. Morrison," she said, her voice carrying just far enough for nearby guests to hear, "your speech was absolutely inspiring. You have such a gift for making people believe in the possibility of change." "Thank you, Victoria. That's very kind. I've been thinking about what we discussed the other day," she continued, her voice dropping to a more intimate tone. "About how isolating it can be when you're committed to work that really matters. Most people don't understand the sacrifice involved." David nodded sympathetically. "It can be challenging, especially when personal relationships suffer as a result." This was Victoria's opening, and she took it. "I hope you know that if you ever need someone to talk to, someone who understands the pressures you're under, I'm here." Her hand moved to his arm again, this time lingering longer. "I know what it's like to feel unappreciated, to pour your heart into something, only to have the people closest to you take it for granted." It was a masterful performance. She was positioning herself as his confidant while subtly criticizing me without mentioning my name. "That's very thoughtful of you," David replied, and I could see Victoria's eyes brighten with what she thought was victory. "Perhaps we could have dinner sometime soon," she suggested. "Somewhere quiet, where we could really talk. I think you might be surprised by how much we have in common." And there it was, the invitation that crossed the line from professional collaboration to personal proposition. Victoria had just propositioned a married man at a public event, thinking she was being subtle. What she didn't realize was that our conversation was being recorded. Earlier that evening, David had discreetly activated a recording app on his phone, which was positioned in his jacket pocket to capture audio clearly. Everything Victoria had just said, her calculated seduction, her criticism of our marriage, her proposition for a private dinner, was now documented. But we weren't done yet. "That's a very generous offer," David said, his voice warm with apparent interest. "I have to admit, it would be nice to have dinner with someone who truly understands my work." Victoria's smile became radiant. "Wonderful. I know the perfect place. Intimate, discreet, somewhere where we won't be interrupted." "Before we make plans," David said, his tone shifting slightly, There's something I should tell you. Victoria's expression flickered with uncertainty. Of course. What is it? David reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone, holding it so Victoria could see the recording app that was still running. I wanted you to know that this entire conversation has been recorded, he said, his voice now clear and firm. Just as every conversation we've had over the past 6 weeks has been documented, the color drained from Victoria's face. What are you talking about? I'm talking about your systematic attempt to seduce me and destroy my marriage to your sister. The same pattern of manipulation you used 8 years ago with Marcus. Victoria looked around frantically, suddenly aware that other guests were watching their interaction with interest. I don't know what you think you heard, but you were simply trying to position yourself as my confidant, while undermining my marriage, and proposing a private dinner that would compromise my relationship with Charlotte. David interrupted. All of which is now documented. I chose that moment to approach them, having watched the entire scene unfold from across the room. Hello, Victoria, I said calmly. Enjoying the gala? Victoria stared at me, then at David, then back at me. For the first time in her life, she was completely speechless. You see, Victoria, I continued, my voice steady and clear. David and I have been happily married for 4 years. We've never had any marital problems, scheduling conflicts, or feelings of neglect. We created that entire narrative specifically to give you the opportunity to reveal who you really are. The small crowd around us had grown larger, drawn by the obvious tension in our conversation. I could see several phones being raised discreetly to record what was happening. The children's healthcare initiative you claim to represent? David added. We checked. They've never heard of you. Your entire approach was based on lies and manipulation, just like what you did to Charlotte and Marcus 8 years ago. Victoria's mask finally cracked completely. You think you're so clever, she hissed, her voice losing all pretense of sweetness. You think you've won something here. I think I've exposed the truth, I replied calmly, which is all I ever wanted. The truth? Victoria laughed bitterly. The truth is that you've always been jealous of me. You couldn't stand that Marcus chose me over you, so you've spent 8 years plotting this pathetic revenge. Actually, said a familiar voice behind her, the truth is that you destroyed my relationship with Charlotte based on lies, manipulated me into a marriage that nearly ruined my life, and now you've attempted to do the same thing to her current marriage. Victoria spun around to face Marcus, who had approached during our confrontation. He looked directly at the small crowd of onlookers. 8 years ago, Victoria told me that Charlotte didn't really love me, that she was only with me for financial security. I believed her because I wanted to feel like a hero, saving Victoria from unrequited love. It took me years to realize that everything she'd told me was a lie designed to manipulate both of us. Marcus, you don't understand, Victoria began. I understand perfectly, he interrupted. Just like I understand that you've been researching Dr. Morrison's family wealth, his foundation work, and his marriage for weeks, looking for an opportunity to insert yourself into his life, the same way you inserted yourself into mine. The crowd around us was riveted. This wasn't just personal drama. This was a public unmasking of someone who had built her entire social presence on deception and manipulation. Victoria looked around desperately, finally realizing that her carefully constructed facade was crumbling in front of Portland's entire social elite. The same people whose respect and admiration she'd been chasing for years were now witnesses to her humiliation. This is ridiculous, she said, trying to regain control. I don't have to listen to these accusations. You're right, I said quietly. You don't, but everyone else does. And now they know exactly who you are. Victoria stared at me for a long moment, her face cycling through rage, desperation, and finally something that might have been recognition. She was seeing, perhaps for the first time, the consequences of her choices. Without another word, she turned and walked quickly toward the exit, her heels clicking against the marble floor in a rhythm that sounded like defeat. The crowd around us began to disperse, buzzing with conversation about what they'd just witnessed. David took my hand, squeezing it gently. Are you okay? He asked. I looked around the ballroom, at the people who had just seen justice served, at my husband who had stood beside me through this entire ordeal, at the life we'd built together that was finally free from Victoria's shadow. "I'm perfect," I said. And for the first time in 8 years, I truly meant it. 3 months later, Victoria quietly left Portland. Word filtered back through mutual acquaintances that she'd moved to Seattle, where she was apparently trying to rebuild her life away from the social circles that had witnessed her downfall. Marcus and I had coffee once more before he moved to San Francisco for a fresh start. He apologized again for his role in what had happened, and I forgave him, not for his sake, but for mine. Holding on to anger had cost me enough years already. David and I grew even closer through the experience of standing up to Victoria together. Our marriage, which had never actually been in trouble, became stronger than ever. We'd faced down the demons of my past as a team and emerged victorious. And me? I finally understood that real happiness isn't about winning or losing, or even about getting revenge on those who've wronged you. It's about building something genuine with people who truly see you, love you, and choose you every single day. Victoria had spent 8 years thinking she'd won by stealing Marcus. But in the end, she'd done me the greatest favor of my life. She'd forced me to discover who I really was and what I was truly capable of. Sometimes, the best revenge is simply living well. But sometimes, just sometimes, it's even better when the people who hurt you get to watch you do it. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now, and hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.